going to start with our first keynote speaker who talk about the positive future with scalable psychology.
Yep, and he's my super guest, honorable guest, and he's joining us from Lithuania. If you know where that is on the earth, it is about 4 a.m. or 4:30, and he's been standing by for a little bit there and enjoying the session with Dr. Tanu Singh, my dear friend, mentor, family, everything in between. David Traub, can you say hello, please?
Hi, everybody. Those are my very first words of the day. It is 4:49 in the morning here.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great.
Your Wi-Fi is great. So I'll take over the session with David, and instead of doing a traditional, conventional keynote with PowerPoint and all that, David and I decided to do a fireside chat just to add to the fire that Dr. Tanu started with us. I mean, I was feeling really warm. I actually had to turn on my AC because for some reason the tapping was really circulating my mind and my body. Now, let me tell you who David is. I already said how he's related to me. He is a keynote speaker. He is an author. He is a script writer. He's a producer. He's so many so many titles. But most importantly of all, he's a scalable psychologist. And this term is relatively new to the world. And he's going to deconstruct all of that to us with my interviewing skills. He's going to have a hard time. No, I was just joking there, David. I was just joking there. And you know what? He's also a storyteller. He is also on the advisory board for the Global Global Community Health Foundation. Actually, I need to get that correct. And he is also the founder of the Global Mental Wellness Foundation, if I'm getting that correct, right, David? You
Global,
do
so two of them.
Yes.
The Global
GCH.
Mental Wellness, globalmentalwellness.org Foundation,
right.
and
right.
also the EIC.Earth, which
so
is also another entity.
Well,
but I actually only do one thing. And
scalable psychology.
Scalable psychology, and right. It's an overarching concept that allowed me to wake up to all the things I had been doing seemingly piecemeal. My parents still don't know what I do for work. And I needed, well, they laud me, but I haven't had what would be called a job in 36 years.
Right.
But in any case, I'm very happy to be here today. I also want to thank not only you, but your partner, Veronica, or yes. Veron, as you just called her.
Oh, we call her Veron, happiness person, everything in between.
What you guys have done out of you, and by the way, that's my fire. I just realized I can bring a fire into the fire. What you have done is followed your authentic self, your intuition. When you guys had this idea, I think you didn't realize where it would go, but this is amazing. I understand that you have brought hundreds and hundreds of people together all over the world. And I've learned in life that when something is good, when it is of the sufficient quality to warrant existence, it happens. And I'm so happy to be here with you guys this early morning.
And David, I couldn't thank you enough. We spent a lot of time, you prepping me, I prepping you, prepping each other for this session. And Veronica and I are so grateful for people like you who would just do this as a gift. So thank you so much. And how about we just get started so I get to put my interviewing skills to use. So first of all, yeah, and thank you for being up so early. To start with, define scalable psychology for us, and why is it important for everybody here listening and for everybody who's going to be joining later?
Well, scalable psychology is a concept that I awoke with about 3 months ago. It is, in fact, a means by which I could define my life of 36 years, because I have been deploying various vertical applications of psychology all my life, primarily through media, through producing movies, through television projects, games, VR, AR, but also counseling, as you know. And what I've come to realize is that probably the greatest challenge we have on the planet is one that may not surprise anybody here, but will shock and even offend many of those who are, in positions of power today, which is the lack of mental wellness. I believe is the source from which we can trace most of our problems. If you start thinking about fear-based behaviors, compensation, aggression, if you think about narcissism, object-oriented narcissism in particular, where people are not empathic or compassionate to those that they're representing in Congress or wherever, if you think about the abuse of our environment, if you think about the lack of critical thinking by which we can listen and filter our environment as it comes in so we can make the right decisions that embrace all of us. I really believe that mental health is the biggest challenge and the lack of mental health. And I started thinking about what I was doing, and I realized, and I woke up one day that with this concept of scalable psychology as the intentional application integration of various digital entertainment, computing means with more conventional counseling as integrated into a single overarching solution on a global basis. And the best way that I could articulate it would be much as a canon. I'm not sure how many people here watch Star Wars or are have any sort of place in their heart for that show. I'm a filmmaker. I have a background in film academically as well. And I would not have watched every Clone Wars, every Bad Batch, and now most every one of the Rebel series, except I have a 14-year-old boy. And every child, as they grow, they need to acquire, and I'll stop because I have a little governor that says 3-minute bites max. Every young person, every person needs to have a structure of meaning in their life. And until you figure out who you are, until you figure out your identity, at which point you become a superhero, you take on what society gives you, and ownership and knowledge of a canon of content like Star Wars, characters, storylines, narrative arcs. That's a canon. You need to have owned something to have meaning. And I started thinking about mental health as a canon. Now, all of us, or most of us here, I would assume, have something to do with mental health or mental wellness. And by the way, I choose to define it as mental wellness, not only because of the more positive connotation. There's a much more positive connotation of mental wellness than there is of mental health. When you think, and I don't mean to digress, but I'm just going down the rabbit hole here. When you say mental health, people on the outside often think of bipolarity or schizophrenia, or some of these more boutique disorders that impact a very small percent of the population. But what is mental wellness? It is the aggregate of all of the disorders that we all share or are exposed to: anxiety, depression, PTSD, which I believe is something perhaps 1 in 3 women experience. Nobody looks at that disorder. They just think of veterans. But think of anybody that's been abused. We are people that have issues related to our mental wellness. And so, what I've looked to do is to find a way to create a canon, an overarching structure of understanding around mental wellness, so that the different autonomous applications, therapy, personal development apps, music that is positive, all these can suddenly be perceived within an overarching discipline, a subset of the greater mental wellness industry or platform, or whatever you want to call it, so we can begin to get our arms around it as professionals to create norms, to create means of evaluation and judgment, measurement, maybe even someday to create regulations. And you can come back at me on that one, regulatory consideration, because you have to be thinking, you have to have a lot of responsibility when you are delivering mental wellness to the world. Because if you don't have a foundational understanding of the way the brain works, the heart works, the spirit works, you can cause negative impact, which brings me to one last thing. And then my speech will be done and we can go back to the yoga, which I really appreciated. But in any case, and I have done comedy, that's also a subset of mental wellness as well. When I began my career in mental wellness, it was as a filmmaker. And I was at Berkeley doing my thesis. And I applied Soviet propaganda techniques to the improvement of American K through 12 education. And so I looked at improving math and history videos. And by using a new kind of narrative, a new kind of cinema called montage that the Soviet filmmakers created, because it was intended to do something cinema never did, which was to be able to trick the brain into believing what you were seeing. If you think about watching a movie, if you see a microphone or the actor looks at the light or the camera, or people just aren't authentic in their rendering, you lose what's called a suspension of disbelief. But if you can create a narrative flow with editing that compounds meaning upon meaning to create a larger meaning, you can immerse yourself. And it was a very, very powerful form of cinema. And what I did this as my undergraduate thesis, and my professors gave me a very good grade. It was my honors thesis, but they told me it was a failure. And I was really kind of, I couldn't understand why they would do that. And they said I did really well in all of my studies, everything that I had studied under them, but I didn't do very well in education. But they never taught me a class in education because I was a film and a rhetoric student. I had gotten what I got for them out of a textbook. And they said, you got this out of a textbook in the library, didn't you? And I said, I did. And I said, well, you did something wrong. There are 5 ways that people learn: motor skills, verbal skills, higher order thinking, symbolic learning, and what was then called attitudinal learning. Today, it's called biopsychosocial education.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there, David. I'm going to pause you there. You've owned your 3 minutes and you've had like over 10 minutes.
Let me do my 10 seconds.
Okay, do your 10 seconds.
The reason they don't call it mental health is because there are so many negative connotations to mental health. Lawyers don't like it because there's a lot of liability. If you say the wrong thing to a certain person, if they're amongst the 12% that actually are aberrant, then you have liability. And the religious people don't like it either because you're infringing. So mental health, what we all address, mental wellness, is a challenging space to address. That was the point I wanted to make. Sorry about that.
Great. No, it's all good. I see where you're going, and thanks for adding.
But you're a
that
pro
10 seconds.
and you're good.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, certainly. And you know, I love when you talk about ownership and that you really certainly own this subject, which you've been doing for over 36 years without many people recognizing that it is mental health. And I like the idea that you pointed out that mental health to most of us, to society, is actually a stigmatism. But I think it's just a being. And I think that's why we call it well-being. And it's not a new word. And I think it's such a great thing that we could be well. So my question to you, David, is with scalable psychology, how can we be well? And you talk about finding meaning and purpose as positive psychology. So over to you for that.
Right. Well, so and you, I'm very grateful for you to keep me on target.
Yeah.
When I woke up 3 months ago, and again when you and I had our great chat, and we've had multiple great chats.
That's right.
I suddenly realized I hadn't really looked up the scalable psychology, so I literally looked it up. And there were references to the term primarily from the World Health Organization, because their mandate is to deploy mental health. Mental health is a big part of what they do, managing the life of refugees, for example, and greater society. But it's not a concept that you hear very often. And I'd never heard that concept before. What is mental health and how can we deploy it? Well, mental wellness, from my perspective, and I'm just channeling here, and this is why we're doing this format, because it's much richer than somebody reading a teleprompter or a PowerPoint. Mental wellness to me, first and foremost, is the love of yourself. It is the acceptance of yourself. It is the awakening to the fact that you've been given your own deck of cards, and that there are cards that appear to be negative, there are cards that are positive, and that they are all a gift to completely distinguish you from every other human in the planet. You remember my concept of experiential DNA, which, like genetic DNA, makes us unlike any other human in history by design. And mental wellness is the love of the life you've been given. It's the realization that who you are is who you need to be. It's listening to yourself as compared to listening to society, your parents, everybody else. It's knowing your truth. It's becoming who you are so you can understand your purpose and you can manifest it. It's coming to the point where you love your life and you're grateful. I'll stop there for a second, but keep steering me.
Thank you, David. Now we're just
Getting into the groove.
Yeah, we're very in
Yes.
tune, really. Now you talk about meaning and purpose a lot, and sometimes it can be very challenging for many people to find their true meaning and true purpose in this lifetime, because most of us are groomed in the way that we need to be successful, we need to earn a lot of money, and we need to have security. Now, I do know that you are the architect of 17 questions to help people find this meaning and purpose. Does it work in your experience? How purposeful has that been for your clients, for your friends and family?
I'm going to come right back to that, and you're going to bring me there, like one of those beautiful Australian sheepdogs, because you're beautiful and not a sheepdog, but they're very, very bright.
I see what
but
you're
I want to
saying.
go back. I want to go back for a second. And I wanted to share my thoughts as they struck me. And this is why I like this fireside, format. You have to go all the way back to humanity. Humans came to consciousness to some degree. I don't know. I mean, maybe always, but let's look at the progression of humanity, 10, 20,000 years ago, right? And then prior to that point, we were tribal species. And people had to work together. They had to be of service. They had, the most physically strong had to defend. The brightest had to innovate, and roles were assigned in humanity so that we could survive. Survival, was always a defining circumstance by which to define our roles in life. As humanity came together, became an agricultural species, began to delegate. Humanity, kept refined more and more its perception of how to look at itself as human capital. And so with human capital, humans took on the role of, whatever their greatest strength would be, as long as they were raised and guided to be there. But there wasn't a lot of room for consciousness. Let's think about Maslow. Maslow's hierarchy says that when you have food, water, shelter, and language, then you can start thinking about having a voice and language. And then you can start thinking about being an artist or an innovator or articulating. And it's only when you get to that point that you actually can begin to actualize, which is to manifest your full capacity as a human being. That's in the athletic sense. But you can also manifest your sense of oneness with all of us and begin to think about the higher order consciousness of meaning and purpose. So having meaning and purpose is really evolutionary. That's kind of the point that I want to make. And it's not something that humans could really think about too much until fairly recently. We're at a point now where we have learned to create, and through manufacturing and processes and supply chain, so much resource for each other. Now, are we managing it perfectly? No, we're not. And we have a long way to go to be sustainable as a species. That's a whole other conversation. But why are humans here? And I believe that the answer to that is ultimately to realize your contribution to the planet, your purpose. I believe that every human being is absolutely unique by design, but no one teaches us that. And where I came up with that concept was all the way back in 1984, and this brings me to the 17 questions. I was reading a book called The Use of Enchantment in the Fairy Tale by Bruno Bettelheim. Now, why was I contemplating that? Because I was looking to create movies that could cause people to pay more attention to the content so they can learn it better. And the way that we learn is that we receive 2 gigabytes of data every second. Right now, even the sound, I'm making it even harder for you to focus. A lot of data, but it's okay because the brain, which has 5 to 7 problems in its mind at any time, in our minds at any time, only filter, only take in what is relevant to the 5 to 7 problems we're listening to. That's the challenge of teaching, by the way. The challenge of teaching is, how do you get your math quiz or your philosophical point to be one of those 5 to 7 problems? Teaching is a real challenge. So this is why I steered towards montage and the Soviet, movie thing as a way of teaching. And as I was reading this one particular book about the fact that at any given time in your life, when you're watching a movie, there's one and only one character that you identify with. And when that character realizes their denouement, their insight or epiphany, you learn it because you were identifying with them. I read it in one of the books on the below the line, there was a footnote, and it led me to a book called In Search of Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Just for a second, how many hands of people know the book In Search of Meaning by Viktor Frankl? Okay, I saw at least one hand here. Viktor Frankl was a prisoner in the concentration camps in Germany. He gave himself the role of sociologist, which wasn't really a discipline back then. He watched what happened to the wealthy, as well as their money, their jewelry, their clothing. After about 5 weeks, their personalities started to erode. After about 8 weeks, their identity started to go. Somewhere between 5 and 10 weeks, their immunity to disease started to go, and they went down. Viktor Frankl didn't go down. He kept his vitality, his clarity, his sense of humor, his health. And that was extremely powerful for him. And it was powerful for me too. And I realized that we get our strength and we get our power from realizing that we're here for a reason. Until we realize our purpose and our meaning, we're contributors to humanity as humanity defines, but we're not really honoring what I believe Darwin suspected was our true purpose, which is to wake up to our contribution to the species. I read recently that most species on average last 1 million to 1.5 million years. They're coming and then they're gone. We're at 200,000 years right now. We're not doing very well. Now, unfortunately, society doesn't teach us that we're this aggregation of rubies, diamonds, and gems, that each of us, by definition, is different from an experiential genetic perspective. Now, we already know that from a genetic perspective, genetic DNA, every human being is absolutely different. And what most people don't know is about every 25,000 years, some genetic aberration, your kidney can filter heavy metal out of your fish, or maybe your adrenal can handle fight or flight mechanism in the 21st century. Life is 1,000 times more stressful than it was 100,000 years ago. But we don't realize that all this experience we have in life is a gift to us. And I started thinking about all of this data and all the experience and all the times I touch the fire and I get burned, and the hugs, and I created this concept. And again, you got to steer me, Teresa. I will go on forever, and I apologize.
I'm about to pause you there.
So here's the
because we need
17
to
questions.
come back. Yes, let's come back
Okay.
to the 17 questions.
Thank you. And you can feel free to interrupt me all the time. So I came up with this concept of a mythological evaluation tool, where I ask 17 questions that span your dreams, intelligences, issues from childhood, job experience, etc. And I began to develop it, and I realized that I could interpolate all of these questions. And it was on a rule basis, by the way, because I had already started doing AI work all the way back in 1977 when I was a midshipman at the Naval Academy. And I realized that I can interpolate all that data into a single 1-minute overarching mythology, which tells you why you're on the planet, what your purpose is, and how to execute. And I began to deploy this test just kind of as an experiment. And I had no idea that this activity would bring me 36 years later to a point where, I now have interface to IBM Watson. I have competing AI labs looking to collaborate with me to automate this. So instead of doing this for the $500 to $5,000, I do it now for people all over the world. And I've done it for people all over the world, billionaires, spies, celebrities, hundreds and hundreds of CEOs. I can do it for everybody on the planet for $25. And then everybody can, number one, first and foremost, realize that they are a gift. But number two, begin to look back at their life, stop being a victim, and begin to realize that everything's perfect and that they have a destiny to manifest and to work towards it so they can give their gift, so that finally they can realize that this experiment called humanity can be a successful experiment and the planet can become the heaven it really is. I'm going to stop talking there to impress you that I can do that.
David. Let's just come back a bit here. I know you can go on forever and talk for the next 3 hours on your own. I think it's important that we address, so what are some of the questions that you actually asked in the 17 questions, and link it back to how actually by, doesn't mean you're serving your mission that you're well, doesn't mean your purpose that you're well. So how does all this link back to being well and being and having sound mental health, David? I think we lose.
You are muted, David.
Unmute.
Wait. Hang on.
Please unmute David. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, but that's how I talk. And anyway,
okay.
I sense I'm being funny. I'm here now. That was just me making
No, you're
believe.
good, David. You were muted for about 2 seconds there. Oh,
Understood.
good. No, you have so much to share with us.
And the street that I live on, this is nothing compared to your part of the world. But the street I live on is 800 years old, and the walls here, you can't see them. They're about this thick. So sometimes the Wi-Fi is not the best. So to answer your question, I'll give you some sample questions, and then we'll just keep on going here. But the questions go over an arc. As you know, Teresa, you've done my 17 questions, and it's designed in a specific way to get people to be able to ultimately be comfortable with sort of deeper questions about issues of childhood, et cetera. But probably the most powerful question, and assuming that some of you someday will want to do this, I don't want to take away all the fun and the epiphanies that happen as you think about these questions, some of which you may not have. But probably my most powerful question is, if you had $10 billion and you could spend it on one and only one issue on the planet, what would it be? And that's a really important question.
And you want my answer for that, right? Should we share it? Okay,
Please.
Let's share it. So I think my answer to you was to help children, right? And then you asked me for what? And I said, well, to help them learn about life, to give them the life skills and the wellness skills that they need to make this life the best, their time on earth the best time, because we don't have these curriculums in school, which you and I have gone through, and many of us are still going through, is that we don't have a wellness curriculum in school. We don't teach life skills, and that was my answer. And you know that I'm already serving my purpose, right?
Yes.
Is that right, David?
Yes. But we didn't stop there, Teresa. If you remember that,
right.
I asked you then, to qualify how and where you would deploy that, because the purpose of the 17 questions is ultimately to give you an executable plan. So it's not just a warm concept. And you told me, was it in school? Was it here or there? And you said not in school, not in conventional platforms, because those kinds of curriculum are not delivered. So, we talked further about how you could integrate your brilliance and your unique capacity to curate conversation, to navigate, interviews in real time with your very bright brain, how you could deploy all of your assets in service to children. And what you were talking about was creating, a curriculum, a platform, a context that could complement schools, but really provide those kinds of that kind of value to kids.
Right. Well, let's go back and link into the great work that you've been doing for 36 years. And let's just help our audience digest a little bit. Is then what does it mean to be well? Do you have 3 words that they could that perhaps they could resonate with, and what it means to have this mind that needs to be sound? And like Tanu said, it doesn't go everywhere, need to vacuum it. What is it in 3 words in David's definition?
3
is
words.
sound mental health. Yeah. 3,
Okay.
because you're writers, I'm going to put you on the spot there, and you could come up with 3 adjectives to help our audience to know that we are well.
Can I begin with the biggest one? Gratitude.
Yay. And this is what we're building
Loving
the summit
your
around today.
life.
Yes.
Loving the gift you've been given, loving
That's
the
right.
deck of cards,
Yes.
you know, so that no matter what happens in life, you're consistent. Yesterday, I had a wonderful conversation with somebody. It was one of my friends in the Middle East who's sitting on, $5 billion.
Right.
And he's a dear friend of mine. I've known him from a long time. He's a Grammy Award-winning movie producer. People don't know, of the wealth that he currently commands. And he said, well, there's 2 kinds of wealth. There is the fleshly wealth, and there is the spiritual wealth. And he said, I know a lot of people with a lot of money, and most of those people are unhappy. Most of those people are when they're alone, they're sad. And so they medicate, and they do so many things to stimulate themselves and to put their mind in a certain place. But the people with spiritual wealth are happy no matter what. They're happy all the time, and they're grateful. So that's the first word. Let me go to the second word.
Gratitude. Okay.
Gratitude, number 1. The second word probably is more important, even though gratitude's really powerful. The second word, and this brings me back to scalable psychology, is hope. And, there are, and I'm going to come back to Stories with this one. There seems to be a dichotomy of a bifurcation of humanity these days, at least in the United States. And I'm not living in the United States right now, and I'm very thankful because I love the experiment of the United States. The Constitution that was written 300 years ago, before they began to modify it about 50 years ago, because they could with wealth, was the most amazing political treatise written in a long time. And what's happened, though, because of limitations to the education system, from my perspective, and I have a master's in education, is the lack of critical thinking. And the lack of critical thinking has undermined, to some degree, the ability to interpret your life in a manner that supports you, supports your community, supports your country, but mostly supports the species. And there's a bifurcation of people to 2 different classes. And now I'm thinking basically, the vote, how the vote happened. And there are those that are fearful. They like hierarchy. They want to be wealthy, or they want to be hierarchical. They want to win. They're not really risk takers. And their job in life is to protect, create, which is all good, look out for their family, and just try to improve their lot. But it's not necessarily about innovation and risk, et cetera, et cetera.
So
and
what
then,
is the third word, David? I'm going to interrupt you there.
No, I want to finish my dichotomy.
Okay.
The other version are the people that have hope, that take risk, and that are innovative and don't think in terms of their own improvement or their own massive wealth. They think in terms of community, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was watching Star Wars with my son about 3 weeks ago, and this goes back to scalable psychology. And George Lucas created Star Wars ultimately as a delivery system for mental health education. His foundation is a mental wellness foundation. And that's really his focus. And he did it in a way to address his own issues, his children's issues. And there was a line in the Star Wars, in the movie called Rebels, that I'm still contemplating today. And the line was, without hope, there is nothing. And I believe that is very, very powerful. Hope springs eternal, as they say. Okay, so what is the third word? It's not in my mind yet. So what is the
And
third
we could
word?
settle for 2, okay? We could settle for 2.
No. I'll
Gratitude
go.
and hope is good.
Look, I've been gifted. We're all given. We have everything that we need. And one of my gifts was OCD. And so I want to get that third number in there. And the third word would be, for me, would be perfection. And what I mean by perfection is not the need to be perfect in everything we do, but rather to understand that everything's perfect. One way or another, everything is as it is. And you just have to understand that. You have to embrace it, and you have to be an optimist. You have to look at your life and understand that you are where you are. This is very Confucian or even Taoist. You have to understand there is wisdom in everything. So I would say that it is gratitude, wellness, and perfection in life. And you just have to embrace what you've been given, make the most of it, and build community around that. And I'll stop there. I have a lot of wisdom to share. I'm in my 60s. I apologize. I'm actually excited. So that's why I'm talking so much.
You are. Unfortunately, we're working with a frame of time here. I think I'd like to, just to help you bring your message out there, David, and to our audience too, that the information will work for them. I think that's why we like this, to make it very practical. So what would be the next step in scalable psychology? Now, we talk about curriculum in school, so we could help the younger generation learn about all the things that you so articulated. Now, one of the teachers one audience was asking that if teaching is already challenging, then what about learning? So how can your concepts of scalable psychology through movies, through media, through your writing, help the world or the younger generation in specific be well? I think that's a very pragmatic question that before you go, we must answer this today, David.
Well, I queued up a song here that I want to play as an example of scalable psychology. And I said earlier that the best way to look at psychology is as a canon, much as in a movie, the canon. Right. In Star Wars, you had a couple Star Wars, and they expanded it. Now they've expanded it massively, staying true to the core characters and storylines, et cetera. Think of scalable psychology as a canon of mental health that now scales out so that when somebody's making a movie, or somebody is producing music, or somebody is writing curriculum for the next day's math, you're incorporating mental wellness into the curriculum. And so when we look at learning and contemplate this metaphor that I gave of the 5 to 7 problems in our mind every day, and it's a teacher's job to make sure that at least one of those 5 to 7 problems is yours. Think about your audience, 13 years old, dopamine flying through their bodies, not knowing what's going on, so much energy, maybe anger, maybe sadness, maybe depression, so much brilliance not channeled within a structure of meaning yet. And in fact, that structure of meaning, if you're not taught that that's really important, may not manifest till they're 40 or 50 or 60 years old or on your deathbed. Whatever it is, it will take you to the point where you can wake up to what is consciousness. And consciousness is self-awareness within the context of the greater life. And so as teachers, as educators, as professors, take into account not just the concept of mental health, but the mental wellness and health of your students. How are they there? How do you build relevance? Think about the great professor you were lucky to have. Maybe we have 3 of them in our life. I had one professor who changed my life in Berkeley. I didn't realize that Berkeley would be hard. I came from an Ivy League background. Mom was a professor at Yale. Dad went to other schools. And I was at a state school because I wanted to get far away. And I liked the idea of the independent thinking that they taught. And this teacher liked me. And she called me into her office one day and she said, if you had $1 million and you could do anything, what would you do? And I thought about it and I said, I would make movies, because I made a movie as a 15-year-old, and I would teach, because I love what happens to a person's eyes, the way they dilate, the pupils dilate when you haven't realized that you're smart, or my God, you realize your purpose. And she said, if you don't do both those things, you don't have integrity. And then I realized my purpose was to use mass media and technology to deliver mental health. And I went from, kind of struggling to an honors student that got a full scholarship to Harvard. It's not that I'm any smarter than anybody else, but I woke up, and I believe all of us every person here is a genius and a superhero, but not till you wake up. Now, I don't know if I answered your question, but the reality is you've got to understand that mental wellness, mental health is an integral part of every curriculum that there is. And we really have to take into account, first and foremost, the mental wealth and, mental wealth, which is the aggregate of mental health and wellness and emotional health of all of our students, and all of this other curriculum, whether it's engineering or AI or philanthropy or philosophy. Those are the tools, and that's the filter by which they will navigate their contribution to humanity, and in the process, their acquisition of quality of life for their children and their loved ones.
Okay, David, we have a few more minutes left. Let's welcome some questions from the audience. We do have one related to learning for ensuring mental wellness or competing in this cutthroat age. Is the world we live in, it's antithesis to mental well-being. That's the question here from one of my students, actually.
Okay,
who's very profound. Yeah.
Right. So what that person is saying is learning, it feels, as I'm describing it, as the antithesis of today's reality. I think that's the question. And well, first of all, learning is not a choice. It's what we're built to do. It's what the brain does. Humans solve problems. We've been doing this since our beginning. And are we the only species that does that? No, monkeys do it. I mean, all creatures solve problems. We will always learn. Now, will we learn and acquire the tools we need for hope, gratitude, et cetera, that's a different story, because society does impact our curriculum, not just our professors, but society itself. And so there needs to be an intervention or an educational overlay, and independent of each of our autonomous national education systems, except for those bright educational systems that understand the value of mental wellness. So I know that for example, with GCH, and I'm very honored, to Ming Kai and Tom and all those here, and I see Joseph Lee. I see some of the faces that I've seen before in the GCH Foundation, and I'm sorry I didn't make it to South Africa, and I'm sorry I didn't make it to Turkey, but I know that that everybody on this chat right now understands the importance of mental health, and I know it's become a much more important part of GCH. It's every human being's responsibility as a parent, as a teacher, and as a human to learn, to grow, and to share with our children the importance of feeling good and loving yourself. And we need to reinforce that curriculum. It's as important or more important, perhaps, as math and writing, et cetera, et cetera. So humanity, not just professors and educators, but all of us. And it's happening. Look, I'm just another human being. Christine, Teresa, you and I are just manifesting our path. We don't really have volition. This is genetics and Darwin unfolding. This conversation, this conference, the people that are here, these hundreds of people, we're just manifesting destiny. It's not that we're great and we're insightful and innovation. We are channeling humanity. Like I said, I came up with this concept of scalable psychology. The World Health Organization has been using it for a while. It's not out there yet, but my job as a media psychologist is to get it out there. And that's all of our job. I don't know. I hope I addressed the issue.
And I think, David, I think there's so many words out there. I think at the end of the day, we're all doing the same thing. So there's people that are trying to help our students to be happy. I mean, I don't think it needs to be mental health, which people still have trouble.
It's negative. It's a negative connotation.
Exactly. So it could be wellness, it could be well-being, it could be getting people to be well. And at GCH, we start with physical activity. So when people feel better physically, mentally, they're going to feel better, right? So I think it's about the feel-good factor, which I think you've been so eloquently articulating throughout the sharing session. Now, more questions for you, David. We're not letting you go. I do love your sharing, by the way. Just a lot of.
I hope. I'm sorry that it's not.
No. Yeah. It's all good. It's all good. So the question for you is really fascinating fireside chat, of course, and thank you for your sharing. Can you talk about how you're using AI and how it comes into play with mental well-being? Okay. And exact question that I've been trying to have a
Okay.
focus here is the practical side of things. Yeah.
So I
Thank
want to
you.
first address your overarching comment. You just changed my opinion, Teresa.
I did.
I've been saying mental wellness over mental health,
Right.
but I don't like the term mental because it
Right.
excludes
Yeah.
biopsychosocial and particularly social and emotional.
Right.
So I think wellness ultimately has to mean mental, biopsychosocial, but it doesn't yet. Until we get there, then we need these overarching terms like scalable psychology to at least impact the professionals, but also
occasionally we get a little bit of a glitch. Don't forget, David is actually in Lithuania. He'll come back in a bit and we'll wrap up. Yeah.
Right. So I just wanted to address that. So, okay. So now let me address the question at hand. In 1989, I was in grad school, and my graduate thesis was I designed the world's first virtual reality simulation game for family therapy. Or actually, it wasn't really even family therapy, it was family systems, because the family systems was where I was really interested in. And family systems is where systems theory, which is so important, came from. Therapy was the source of this much greater discipline of systems theory, which impacts and defines so many analytic disciplines across our species right now. And how did I use AI? And I was at the Media Lab at the same time. What I learned, which was fascinating, was that scripts follow a sequence. They're programmable. When you have happiness just doesn't, you don't get happy. You go through a progression of behavioral plateaus getting there. Same with sadness. And why did I care about that? Because I was creating animated representations of your siblings, your parents, your elders. I need to find a way to represent and simulate different characters within the context of this greater system called the family, within the context of this greater system called the ecosystem. Why? Because a family of 5, well, let's just say many of you only have, if a lot of you are in Asia, maybe you only have 1 or 2 siblings. So let's just go with 4, 2 parents, 2 kids, or even 3. Let's just go 3. 3 individuals is not 3 individuals. In a family ecology, 3 individuals is a single double-bound character. Over time, you are not individuals. You are a single double-bound character that only changes very slowly over time by external circumstances. Death in the family. You win $1 million. Kid goes to school. So how do I represent that? I had to create a computer simulated representation of family that when you choose on the menu, different external circumstances, like I've just defined, I could simulate those behaviors. That was AI. And let's not call it AI. Let's just call it an expert system. And so an expert system allows you to represent different realities that begin to simulate reality enough so you can get that suspension of disbelief. You can believe in it, and then you can learn from it by the process of identity. I produce movies, I produce games. When I produce games, for example, I created a game for the band called Queensryche, called The Promised Land, which was a psychological profiling of each of the 5 band members. And then I created worlds that represented them. I wanted this world to have that, create that suspension of disbelief. So I used AI to simulate reality and randomness by having trees move and things happen. And when it comes to my 17 questions, which is probably my greatest, not my greatest, but my main contribution to the planet, I realized from the beginning that my 17 questions had to be programmable. So I made it rules-based. As I aggregated more interpretations of people's answers across these, more than 1,000 times that I've done it, because the answers are always different, I took those answers as rules, so that when someone says to me, I had an alcoholic parent, so I'm really empathic. I could, or someone says I'm really empathic, I could understand that probably when they were younger, they had an alcoholic parent or an addicted parent or something who treated them as an emotional slave. This is, Alice Miller's work in The Drama of the Gifted Child. That's a rule. So instead of one of the other 7, types of intelligence, if their intelligence was their ability to feel other people, I could get insight to where that comes from. So using AI, if we want to call it AI, or using, rules, which is more expert language parlance, you can begin to create more and more of the simulation of reality that allows people more and more to move towards buying into and believing and participating with your software. I'll stop there.
Oh, David, you read my mind. It's so great. The audience is loving your talk. I wish we could have a summit on this alone. Scalable psychology is so important. I'm going to get one more feedback or question here from the audience for you. Is that okay? They love what you're sharing,
Yeah.
David. You are really a wizard in this, really. Biopsycho social spiritual framework is more holistic, and one of our psychologists, Dr. Adrian Lim, is saying that actually. And Joseph also typed me a message here saying Christina agrees that with what Teresa's saying, and what you said too, is that we lack such a curriculum in our schools. And here's one more question from Christina. Though we identify that yet the academy schools still can't adjust even for our MOE, I believe they know yet they push the parents and the world we live in now, that we don't have a choice for the parents to earn more and acquire more for the children. Not sure if that really the children is what they really truly need. I think what she's saying is that parents also need to come up with the idea to be able to request schools to provide such a curriculum and life skills for the children. So I think us at GCH, right, David, with Thomas, with the founder and co-founder, also Dr. Min Kai Chin, we want to work with this with children in our schools. Is start with the physical activity and then go into the mind aspects, the emotional aspects too. And I think what we've been addressing here, which you've been saying a lot in your own words, is that it's a whole being. It's not just one thing. And in being well, it's about being physically well, mentally well, emotionally well. And we have to be well in order to be clear in our purposes and meanings in this time on earth, right? That's what you've been saying.
So Teresa, you're so bright. You packed so much in. I'm just going to have to share what comes to my mind, but
yes, please.
Steer me back. Just a couple things. The fact that GCH, which is in 93 countries, reaching millions and millions of kids every week, they came in through the back door, because if you came in offering curriculum, you would get nowhere. That's the mistake that most entrepreneurs make in education. They want to make the world a better place through education. So they create curriculum, and you can't get into the schools with curriculum except through a long, laborious process. The brilliance of GCH and its origination in the company called Hop Sports was that it came in and delivered curriculum that the schools couldn't get the best of, which was exercise, physical exercise. That's where it all started 15 years ago. And slowly but surely, they began incorporating nutrition and diet, et cetera, et cetera. And then 10 years ago, Tom and I started talking about mental health, slowly but surely. And it was not something you could talk about in the schools, but the world is more and more ready now. And the ministries of health and ministries of education around the world are realizing that they're not getting the most out of their children. Now, granted, their purpose is to have the best and the brightest and the most innovative kids, so those kids can foster and further the economy. So because remember, we are individuals, but according to systems theory, so are our countries. You can look at a family of 5 as an individual with systems theory, family systems theory. A family of 500 million, it's still an individual. It needs blood, it needs oxygen, it's got emotional states. And everybody, every species and every being, whether it's an individual or a country or a species, is still looking to survive and thrive. And where we want everyone to go is to thrive and to hope and to be grateful for their existence. Society and humanity is moving in this direction. Okay, so that's a good thing. But to bring further light to what you're saying, they say, and people say, and there's a lot of media on this, who is the biggest challenge to education? Is it the child? Is it the schools? It's the parents. Because the parents spend so much more time with the children than anybody, and the parents haven't been educated. And if you compromise, the parents' belief system, then depending on where you are, you get in trouble. You get pushback, Whereas the parents and the teachers and the schools and the society need to be working together. So the more that we can, get that entire ecosystem of support, reinforcing the importance and value of wellness, but the kind of wellness we're talking about, by which scalable psychology will be needed on a global basis to recruit the filmmakers and the musicians. Listen to this, just for 30 seconds. I know my time has passed, but I wanted to play a single song here that shows how mental wellness is moving its way into the mainstream, if it will come up here, because I've got a bad mood, but you'll listen. If you listen carefully to music, you're going to hear people talking about wellness and, in song. And if you see movies, things like Star Wars or games, or, slowly but surely, the world as an individual is reflecting its needs and the urgent needs. And I believe that mental health is becoming the biggest challenge, but it's not just me, society and Congress and everybody else that, everybody's beginning to realize, the World Health Organization, that we need to focus on wellness if we're going to survive and thrive as a species, and we need to do it together.
Right. David, are you going to press a button or you're done? We're good. I think what we're going to do, David, is look, stay where you are. No, you're good. You're good. It's fantastic. Like I said, we could have a whole summit on this. So thank you so much for your wisdom.
I'm grateful to be here, Teresa.
Yeah,
and I'm grateful to be here with you
too. Yes.
and with all of you. And by the way, the barcode in the background to your right is what caused me to talk so much, because you are an artist, and that barcode is so creative that it channeled my inner child, and that's why I talk so much. Normally,
so it's my fault usually. Okay, but I want to correct that. This painting is created by an artist friend of mine. This painting is called The Beach, by the way. It's a perfect symbol for our summit here, because life is a beach, and we should just enjoy it. Like David said, it's just perfect as the way it is.